Traders, how are you? Marcello here, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader, where you guys can come and trade our money live for just an application process for 120 bucks. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Had a little bit of a chaotic week with the weekend. Sorry if you guys were looking for the podcast and it wasn't available, but now we got everything fixed, so we are doing the podcast again. If there's any topics that you guys want me to go ahead and talk about on the past podcast, let me know. I've been thinking about doing other topics about finance and things along those lines. Overall, this week on Monday, the markets were mostly sideways due to the Lunar New Year in China. Markets headed higher both on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then on Thursday, a lot of the main U.S. stock markets suffered losses of over 1% due to the fact that the White House advisor Larry Kudlow said that there's a sizable distance in the trade talks between U.S. and China. If you guys remember, if I'm not mistaken, last week and the week before, and probably the week before that, part of the reason why the market started to recover was because they were saying that there were some kind of agreements or there was going to be a meeting. Now, apparently, they're not going to meet until later, so obviously that affected the market quite a bit. U.S. corporate earnings season has hit midweeks. About 234 of the 500 firms in the S&P 500 have already reported their earnings for quarter four, including the year. They were higher than expected. The expected from analysts were 15.5% increase. They had an 18% from the year before, which means 2017 to 2018. Because remember that the earnings come out in the first quarter of 2019 for the year previous in quarter four of the previous year. Overall, this week, U.S. indices are higher. The Dow is 0.17%, the S&P 500 0.04% positive, and the NASDAQ 0.47%. FactSec Research is saying that the profits for the S&P 500 are expected to decline 1% during the quarter one of 2019 compared to the quarter one of 2018, and we're going to see the first overall drop since quarter two of 2016. In overseas market news, the world stocks clinged to a two-month high on Monday as the dollar was strengthening, and also the European markets struggled to provide momentum due to the fact that we had the reports, or let's say the data from the manufacturing and also the employment sector in the U.S., that information started to fade a little bit with the reports that were coming out. On Tuesday, there's an index called the Stocks Europe 600, which takes a lot of the stocks of a lot of different companies in Europe, including the U.K., which remember, probably is not going to be part of Europe anymore very soon, but it's a big chunk, the U.K. They said that the index of all of these stocks around Europe went up for the sixth day on Tuesday. Wednesday rebounded due to positive corporate profits and reversed on Thursday due to the continued poor economic growth data and trade news. Overall, the European markets for the week, the biggest winner was the London FTSE at about 0.80% positive. Frankfurt, the DAX went down 2.49%, and the Latin American markets, the Bovespa in Brazil went down the most at 2.64% negative, and the Colombian Colcap was the winner in Latin America at a positive 0.82%. Asian markets mostly mixed as well. The Nikkei in Japan, negative 2.24%, the biggest loser, and Australia went up 2.31%, which was the biggest winner in that side of the world. Quite a bit of news this week in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. If you guys remember, I want to look up a video that I did in, I believe, 2017 or 2018. Just look up 3 things that you should know about the cryptos, or 3 things you should know before Bitcoin. There's a cautionary tale, let's say, in regards to the regulation. Bitcoin or cryptos aren't regulated at all. And remember that we have to kind of put a divider or a barrier to divide the technology behind Bitcoin, which is blockchain, and then the digital assets, the digital cryptocurrencies themselves, because essentially they're 2 separate things. A lot of people like to mix them together. I believe 100% in what's called the blockchain, which is the technology. A lot of people now call it the divided ledger technology. They have a lot of different names for it now. But we had a situation not in Bangladesh or some third world country, but in Canada. There was an exchange called Quadriga CX where a CEO basically that was the only person who had the keys to a lot of the wallets basically died, supposedly, right? There's now some people are asking to see the body. Now there's some kind of information saying where in the Philippines where they have a lot of fraud with the death certificates, that a lot of questions are being raised, but essentially he died supposedly, and he's the only person that had $200 million worth of wallets, and he's the only person that had the key. So literally in Canada, not in Bangladesh or Nigeria or wherever else, $200 million are lost. This is part of the things that I was telling you guys about in terms of being careful, because this isn't, like I said, a third world country. This happened in Canada. So be very careful, because again, I believe 100% on blockchain. Cryptocurrencies, not so much. Other than that, we had another big news, U.S. virtual currency. Kraken said on Monday that it acquired a company called Cryptocurrencies, which was the cryptocurrency index that provided the reference point for the futures in Bitcoin on the CME. Other than that, we had a situation this week where Bitcoin recovered a little bit. It went up 5.20% at just under 3,600. And we haven't had that really big recovery that all of these analysts were saying. But don't worry, it'll get to 50,000 by the end of this year. Don't worry. That was sarcasm if you guys couldn't see that in my voice. For those of you guys listening to the podcast, financial news this week. New U.S. sanctions on the government of Venezuela. J.P. Morgan is considering removing the securities of the country out of its emerging market bond indexes. Other than that, a judge approved a forgiveness of 1/3 of the $18 billion in the sales tax bond debt that Puerto Rico has to be able to go ahead and fix its broken finances. India's central bank unexpectedly dropped its interest rate by 25 basis points to 6.25%. They're saying that they're focusing on the slowing inflation. It reached an 18-month low in December. Bank of England is keeping its rate steady as well. Other than that, they slashed the growth forecast to about 1.2%, and you guys will hear me again say that they slashed it again. That's why I never report the expectation numbers, because they just, everything's awesome until it's not awesome anymore, right? Everybody, if you guys go back and look at all the CNBC and CNN and news reports just before the crisis in 2008, 2009, everything's wonderful. Nothing bad can happen. And then we had the worst economic contraction in decades. So that's why I never kind of tell you guys what the expectations are for that reason. But you guys will see what I'm talking about after I tell you guys the forecast for the UK economy again in a few weeks or a few months. We had a merger of two banks creating the sixth largest bank in the U.S. BB&T and SunTrust. $66 billion merger is going to create the sixth largest in the U.S., as I just mentioned to you. U.S. Treasuries, if you guys remember, I gave you guys a lesson in terms of the interest rates or the yields on the bonds, essentially the interest rate on the U.S. debt. Whenever we have a situation, and I'll just give you guys a little bit of a lesson, again, whenever we have the long-term debt cross the short-term debt, meaning when the long-term bond yields go down and they invert with the short-term yields, meaning the long-term goes down, the short-term goes up, that's an indicator of a recession coming. So right now, the 3-month is at 2.43%. The 2-year, is at 2.46%, a difference of 0.03, and they're continuing to invert. Not invert, but they're continuing to get closer of inverting. The 2-year and the 5-year have already inverted, right? They went back and forth, but they've already inverted. The 10 years at 2.63 and the 30 years at 2.97, and the difference between that is about 0.34. So every week it's getting the inversion, they're getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And when all of these actually invert, one between the other has already inverted, even though it's kind of going back and forth. That's a strong indicator of a recession. Remember, I've been telling you guys since I started the videos years ago what was coming in 2019. I think the brunt of it, or the more, let's say, harsh part that we're going to feel is probably going to be more in 2020, depending on what the government is going to try to do to save it, which obviously isn't going to help. It's going to make it worse, most likely. In commodities, BP invested heavily in U.S. shale oil last year. They bought major assets from an oil mining firm called BHP for $10.5 billion. With that, the profits more than doubled from 2017 to 2018 to $12.7 billion. The oil and gas output soared as well. French oil company Total, which is the biggest in France, also reported strong profits and rising production. U.S. crude overall went down this week at 4.76% to 52.72, and international Brent went down 0.90 to reach 62.11. Iron ore futures have extended a recent rally, more than anything in Singapore, at $94 per ton, plus 5.8% this week. It's the highest since August of 2014. This week they actually raised 9%, not 5.4%, as I just mentioned to you guys a moment ago. And it jumped 14% last week after an accident in Brazil. Gold and silver prices slipped to the lowest point in nearly a week as the dollar and global equities firm on the back of upbeat economic data in the U.S. Gold went down 0.26%, silver went down 0.44%. In political news, UK Prime Minister, as I told you guys in the beginning, is trying to make sure that they're on time with the departure from the European Union. The date is the 29th of March, so the end of March, even though a lot of the ministers inside her cabinet are starting to suggesting a delay in that. Juan Guaido is trying to remove the current leader, or the current, let's say, I don't know if I should call him the president anymore, Maduro in Venezuela. If you guys don't know what's going on in Venezuela and you are for socialism, definitely check it out, because there's lines going around blocks and hours for food. Essentially what he's saying is, since he has partial power now in a lot of countries around the world, especially the European Union, a lot of people are starting to flip and give him their support, especially the U.S. The U.S. is saying that they haven't called out military action in Venezuela, but he is saying that as long as everything is done according to the law, any agreements made with the previous regime, or the current quote-unquote regime in power, which is Maduro, will be honored as long as it's lawfully done. Trump gave his State of the Union address in Congress. He seeks fair trade, cheaper prescription prices, and also an improvement in the nation's infrastructure. Catalan in Spain. Catalonia, the pro-independence parties are rejecting a framework for talks, let's say, with the central bank in Spain. They're trying to resolve that situation where, a lot of people in Catalonia they're the biggest by percentage economy-wise, the biggest percentage that inputs to the Spanish economy, and because that, they want to leave and be their own country. Spain doesn't want to, so obviously we still have that kind of dispute between the two. House Democrats also introduced a Green New Deal, which aims to make the U.S. carbon neutral in 10 years. It sets a marker for the Democrats for the 2020 presidential election to try to make a point of climate change. The Republicans, on the other hand, are saying that the new Green Deal is a socialist manifesto, and it's going to take our growing economy off the cliff and our nation into bankruptcy. So remember, I never am going to get political on this program. I just want to report the news to you guys, make sure you guys understand. So it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican or whatever you love or hate. I'm always going to be impartial. That's what they stated, okay? In economy, the Commerce Department is saying that the new orders for U.S.-made goods unexpectedly fell. It fell by 0.6% in November and another dip of 2.1% in October. The sharp declines in demand for machinery and electrical equipment begs the question, is the U.S. economy further slowing as well? German industrial output unexpectedly dropped in December as well. And remember that Germany is the largest economy in Europe, the fourth largest in the world, and they are an industrial powerhouse. So this is a really big set of news, because the construction sector also fell by 4%, while the auto sector rebounded 7%, even though there was a growth output miss. So other than that, the question is, Germany might actually be in a recession already after the Q3 GDP drop. And GDP, if you guys know, is the size of the economy whenever I refer to GDP, for you guys that are new to this. The European Commission slashed another one. The European Commission slashed its growth for the Eurozone in 2019 from 1.9 to 1.3. Watch it be slashed again by the end of the year. Another sign of the slowing economy. The Eurozone businesses are starting 2019 with their weakest growth rate since 2013, with a slowdown in manufacturing that's spreading into services, and it's the weakening demand for the first time in over 4 years. In corporate news, Ryanair dipped 4% on Monday after they reported a $22.4 million loss in quarter four. General Motors is going to lay off close to 6,000 people. Sony went down 8% as they cut their outlook for the year. There's been a weaker than expected sales in cameras and smartphones. Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, gotten $39.3 billion in revenue in just the quarter four, meaning the last 3 months of the year. That is an ungodly amount of money. Now, even though there was an increase of 22% from 2017, in quarter four, their operating margin went down by 21%. Luxury fashion Hermes reported sales of almost $6.8 billion in 2018. It's a rise of 10% from the previous year. They're crediting a 14% increase in sales from China and Asia. And also shares in Indian automaker Tata Motors plunged 30%. If you guys remember, Tata Motors, it's a huge conglomerate in India. They bought the UK Jaguar and Land Rover. So the sales from those actually dropped by 40% in January, from January to 2018, and obviously that caused a huge plunge in their stock price of 30%. They ended up 17% down for the week. In technology, Volkswagen, remember, the largest producer of cars in the world still, 4 years running, you said, right, Hag? 4 years running. They are going to install 100 charging stations with Tesla battery packs around the U.S. to keep costs down for drivers using electric vehicles. Google's parent company, Alphabet's life sciences arm called Verily, if I said that correctly, is looking for partners to co-develop shoes with embedded sensors to track every movement that you make in your life. No, I'm sorry. Monitor the wearer's movement, weight, and measure all that stuff. They're doing everything possible just to track everything we do on there. Trump is going to set to sign an executive order next week banning all Chinese telecom equipment. He's saying that it's going to provide protection against U.S. cyber threats. In investment news, Janus Henderson Investors is reporting that Bill Gross is going to retire. He's been in the finance industry for more than 4 decades. He helped fund what's called PIMCO. It's a company which is the largest bond fund manager in the world. And later he moved to manage Unconstrained Bond Fund as well. Papa John's went up 9% on news that a hedge fund called Starboard Value is investing $200 million in the struggling pizza firm. May add another $50 million by the 29th of March. And they're naming CEO Jeffrey Smith to be named as the new chairman as well. Slack, which is the company that most of you guys use to kind of organize your information, thanks to Dan over here, I started using it. Which is awesome. I recommend you guys use it as well. Last August, it was valued at $7.1 billion. They're filing the paperwork to go public. They've already raised about $1.2 billion from investors, including SoftBank and Accel. SoftBank is a Japanese firm operating profit quarter four of $4 billion. Holy crap. That's so much money these companies are making. So they had operating profit of that amount. They have wait till you listen to these numbers. They invested about $45 billion into tech firms around the world, and they still have $50 billion to invest. Their shares surged to near 18%. And other than that, they're saying that they're going to buy their own stock, $5.5 billion worth by next year. German antitrust office is ruling Facebook is abusing its position because of its dominance. They're combining information from other platforms like WhatsApp and Instagram to create kind of third-party websites to build unique users, build unique profiles on users. As usual, the European Union giving fines and all kinds of stuff to the U.S. companies. 11 EU nations are joining, as I told you guys before, recognizing the opposition leader Juan Guaido as the interim president on Monday. They're also Venezuelan. It's hard to kind of say who's the president now because you had the president before, which was Maduro, which took over from the socialist paradise of Chavez after he dies. By the way, he was a bus driver, so obviously he's qualified, right? And now we have Juan Guaido, which is the opposition leader, which a lot of people are saying are the interim president. So there's two presidents essentially. One has part of the power. Guaido also has part power, even though now there's a lot of people that are starting to support Guaido to relinquish Maduro's power on Venezuela. So Maduro, the previous guy, the bus driver, I say a bus driver because, he hasn't done very good things for Venezuela. He says that he's getting ready to defend our country. And even though the U.S. press is saying that he should cede power, the U.S. is also saying that military force remains an option in Venezuela as well. After pledging full support for the Venezuelan president, Russia is starting to show signs of doubt about his ability to be able to survive. I don't know if you guys remember, I believe a few weeks ago, even in December, I told you guys that he probably wasn't going to last a month. If you guys want to go back and catch that video that I talked about him as well. Other than that, Maduro is also blocking humanitarian aid and also not allowing or trying to stop security forces and military personnel from crossing the border as well. U.S. and Russia suspended a 1987 nuclear weapons treaty on Saturday. It banned land-based missiles with a range of 300 to 3,400 miles and kept nuclear-tipped cruise missiles off the European continent for 30 years. And with approval ratings falling, with state funds needed as a hedge against new Western sanctions and stagnant living conditions, the Russian president cannot afford a costly nuclear arms race with the United States. Most likely the reason why Trump wanted to get out of it, to be able to provide more pressure against Russia. President Trump is also saying that he plans to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on February 27th and 28th in Vietnam. This is going to be their second in-person meeting. And in the unusual facts this week, I'm butchering those unusual facts, huh? Let me start over, a little bit slower. In the unusual facts this week, near 12% of U.S. workforce was expected to not go to work on Monday. Probably a lot higher in Boston since the New England Patriots won. Man, that was a tongue twister, wasn't it? Residents and tourists from a town in western Cuba reportedly saw a flare pass through the sky and heard an explosion last Friday. The officials, obviously the well-trusted officials of Cuba, said that it was a meteor strike. French President Macron is recalling his ambassador to Rome in a move unprecedented. I must, because we're getting to the end of the video, obviously, right? In a move unprecedented since World War II. They're saying that they're fed up with the repeated, I'm butchering this last part, but you guys are with me. He fed up with the repeated and baseless attacks by the Italian political leaders against France. Prime Minister in Italy says that the meeting with the France's yellow vest activists were legitimate this week. So just so you guys can get an understanding of this, the Prime Minister of Italy is saying that the meetings that they had were legitimate with the yellow vest protesters that are against the French government. So a little bit of tension going on between Italy and France there, obviously. Bezos wrote a blog post saying that he's being extorted and blackmailed by AMI, which is another, let's say, media entity. They say that they have some compromising pictures of him from the selfies and the, let's say, soiree that he had with his lover before he got the divorce. So he's saying that he's being extorted, and he put it publicly in a blog post. And other than that, the Tesla Model 3, which has reduced its $42,900 price tag, was the best-selling luxury vehicle of any kind in the U.S. in 2018. That's really, really interesting. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to put the questions with hashtag AskMarcello, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.